Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode.
Thank you for joining us today on the Kingdoms Podcast. Today we are with Corey Stephenson. He's actually a friend that we did our undergrad together. He was a few years ahead of me and inspired me many, many times. And since then, he's been off to Biola to do an MA in philosophy, at U of T at Regis College, doing an MA in theology, and is currently working on some psychology courses and looking to go to Penn State for an MA in positive psychology. So he's a fellow who is definitely a thinker, and we have some interesting topics that we want to be talking about today, and we hope that it's really just like an encouragement to you as you listen or watch, and that we might be able to think on who God is together. So Corey, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Right on.
I didn't know that I inspired you. I it's boosted my ego a bit.
Oh, dude, you inspire me like all the time. You fire off those little like messages on Facebook. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah, you're making me feel good about myself, man.
Oh yeah, no, it's good. Well, Corey, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? How has your journey with Jesus really just unfolded? Since you were young, whatever that looks like. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a nominal Christian home. My parents went to church because it was what you did. So I don't remember much about the church they took me to. It was this old Presbyterian church. I just remember the bats, up in the high tower. And that's about it. Like I remember kids' church, hiding under the table, and the bats. So not much of an impression on me, but we stopped going there, and at some point my parents had some kind of born again experience. My dad was baptized, and so we started going to a local church where much of my mom's family was going, and it was there I started going to, like, getting more involved. A lady started doing Bible studies, and so it was becoming more real to me, something I wanted to take more seriously. I was baptized myself in junior high, and I was nothing but sincere with that. The Bible studies that this lady was leading helped me to connect what was going on Sunday with the rest of the week. So beginning to see that Christianity was a whole life thing, because I was going to secular public schools, so not much Christianity there. And so during high school was when I started making my faith really my own and asking some of the big questions. I wasn't a great student at all, really. C average student. And I don't really have a vision for school, really. But I was beginning to ask questions that I realized many people had asked before. They were called philosophers. I wasn't able to take a philosophy course in school, and I find that crazy that we don't have that. But questions that you'd find in Ecclesiastes, like, is it all vanity? What's the purpose of it? I get up, I make my bed, and then I come home and I mess it up again. What does this all mean? What is this all for? What's the meaning of life? And is my faith true? I was talking with people who believed in things like evolution. Like, what about that? And are we just cosmic accidents, trousered monkeys? Is that true? And so I don't know how it happened, but I remember just Googling, like, I don't know, is Christianity true or something, like, does God exist? And I came across William Lane Craig. Now I'm sure you guys have come across him, but just in case your audience hasn't, he is a professor at Talbot and Houston Baptist, one of the leading Christian apologists and philosophers today. Remarkable guy. I got to study with him at Biola, which was a dream.
Right on.
Yeah, it was fantastic. He was definitely a hero of mine, and had a huge impact on my faith growing up. But anyways, I came across him, and he had debates with atheists, so I started watching those and listening to podcasts. He has a Defenders podcast at Sunday school where he talks about God and time and all that. So I was listening to that on my spare, because I'm like, these are the questions, like, why aren't we addressing some of these questions, these big questions? Like, God's the biggest thing you can think about, like, and we're not thinking about that. I don't get that. And it was during that time I was trying to become more of an integrated, sincere person, I guess. I was struggling with hypocrisy, wanting to be cool, partying and all this. So it was a mix of like, is my faith true? And also like trying to live it out, and not get caught up in the world and do things that agonize my mom. So yeah, I mean, during that time I was able to lead one of my friends to faith, and like I said, yeah, trying to make it more my own thing. I wanted to get into art and graphic design. I drew all the time, and it's probably because I didn't have the attention to pay attention to classes, so I just drew just like caricatures of kids, just like but after high school I said I need an orientation for my life. What does this all mean? If I was told to go and get a job, but what's my job for? Is it just for me? Is it just to make money? That's all just for me. But surely if I'd already realized that if things were meaningful, there must be a greater purpose. I need to be connected into something. And to me, that something was God. God created the universe, created me, and so my purpose has to be connected to God. What is God's will for me? So I wanted an orientation for my life, really. I thought maybe I should go to Christian school and develop my faith more. And I had gone to Haiti at the end of high school, and so I thought, well, maybe I can do like a mission certificate. And so I did that, and it was at Heritage that I really started getting into apologetics and philosophy. I was really wrestling with whether the whole thing was true, and just things like nihilism, like, is it all vanity? Like, what would it matter if I just killed someone? Now reassure your audience, I wasn't actually contemplating that. This isn't like Crime and Punishment. I wasn't on the verge of that, but just a thought, like what limits that? Like, why? Mm-hmm. And it was a scary thought. It was a frightening thought. So it was during that time that I really had a crisis of faith, but through prayer and perseverance and just, God's grace, like showing me various Christian people that stabilized me, I was able to come through that. People like J.P. Moreland, Dallas Willard, just lovely Christian men, brilliant philosophers. Actually, both Craig and J.P. became or were proclaimed some of the top most influential living philosophers by a secular education magazine, which is kind of cool. So yeah, during those, so I decided to stay at Heritage, give up drawing. I probably wasn't going to make money, although, I haven't been able to make money doing what I'm doing anyways. So, but I really began to develop a passion for apologetics, for giving a reasoned defense for what you believe, for theology, like what is it that I believe? What do Christians believe? Philosophy even, and at times not seeing a great distinction between the two. pursuing wisdom, arguments for God's existence. What's the nature of the human person? Do we have a soul? These big questions. Because they had stabilized my faith and they were deepening me as an individual, and they were getting me, well, again, like I said, my parents might not completely understand the path I took, but they see me as being a better person. And they keep saying, like, hopefully you can get a job out of what you're doing, but it's deepened me and made me a better person. And so I wanted to share that passion with others, other Christians who are having doubts, who didn't feel like they can be authentic. I mean, today there's this big phenomena of deconstructionism, and it's finally like people are catching up with this. It's not like it's entirely new, but realizing that if the church is to be the pillar and ground of truth, we have to be open and honest, not duck and dodge hard questions, and realize that if there is a better way, Jesus would point us there, and that he's not afraid. I mean, if he's the Logos, if he's the mind of God, if he is the truth, like he's not afraid. So anyways,
so that's also significant. I mean, as you were just saying, some of those key philosophers that shaped your perspective, William Lane Craig, J.P. Moreland, for listeners, we would hugely encourage you to check out their stuff. Even Dallas Willard, who's since passed away a few years ago, but his writings are so valuable. And so it sounds like there's this, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this place where you're in high school and you're like whatever school. But in a way, it's almost the crisis of those questions, right? It's of this saying like, hey, like, is this real? Does my faith make sense? Are there valid reasons for me actually saying I'm going to give the rest of my life to following this God? And if I am, I need to understand why. I need to understand like the nuts and the bolts of that, which I love, because I think some people reach that point of crisis, and hopefully in some form or another, every Christian has that kind of moment where they're saying, man, I've got to, this is where the rubber meets the road. I've really got to hammer this out. Like I need to know why I believe what I believe and how that's going to shape the way I live. And so I'm sure it was very difficult at times, but I appreciate your honesty and talking about that crisis of faith at Heritage. And so on that journey for you, you're at Heritage, and even post Heritage, you're at Biola. You're in these Christian academic communities. These Christian academic communities. Obviously, there's things like chapel. You've probably got prayer time with the guys in your dorm, and et cetera.
Although at Heritage, I did sleep through probably too many. My bad habits, didn't go away my first year Heritage.
Fair enough.
Honest. So
I'm sure
DJ, he's probably in there with a broom, jabbing.
I'm sure Heritage has since forgiven you. But so in that, like, I would love for you to go a little bit deeper in that and talking about that evolution of your faith, specifically in those academic settings, on two fronts. One, what were the instances where you said, I'm dissatisfied and disappointed, these answers are insufficient, or maybe even, I'm looking at the lives of people who have just kind of in blind faith just accepted whatever their pastor or even a professor has said without really wrestling through it. And what did that process for you, saying, I'm going to challenge these things, I'm going to probe these things? And then on the flip side, and you've mentioned already Craig and Moreland, but who are maybe some of the more like right in community with you, or just people that you observed saying, you know what, the way that they're loving God with all their mind, I want to do that. I'd love to, because there's that real tension in learning, right? Where there's this place where it says that I'm not satisfied with that. But on the flip side, where we say, wow, that's so compelling. How do I pursue that? What did that look like for you in those first, 4 to 8 years of post high school academic work?
Well, I began having certain questions which I saw were valid and deep and important. And I was becoming dissatisfied with the fact that in high school, I couldn't raise those questions. In the religious studies class, it was marked by relativism and just a weak form of a flabby form of tolerance, and I thought to myself, I'm all for dialoguing with others, but truth exists. There must be truth here, or if not, why not think it's just empty? Why, what's to guide us? It seems arbitrary. Like, what, we just come here and, share our stories and be authentic, and that's it. And then we're not moving, no, I wanted to argue about religion, and not in the sense of getting angry and so forth, and as Christians, like, things like apologetics and philosophy are ministries of love, but I want to dialogue there. I want to get at reality, there's that line of Augustine where he talks about like his soul panting for truth. And so that was me, and I was just trying to put thought to that. So there was dissatisfaction there. I was able to raise some of those questions in law class, which is why I did well. I was able to think more philosophically, and we were taught that. So I remember asking questions about moral relativism and absolutism. Like, is there an unshakable ground to morality? Do we discover morality, or do we invent it? Like, is it like a science in certain respects, or is it more like an art, something we discover, something we construct and come up with, and that depends ultimately on us? I remember like asking him, like, oh, if people write laws on stone tablets, but what if we just destroyed the tablets? Like, what makes it binding and objective? And he was like, that's a really great question. And that goes right back to some of the Greek philosophers. I'm like, who are those guys? Why aren't we learning about that? So it was my dissatisfaction with, not having these questions, which at first I thought were just weird, but turned out to be what a lot of people throughout history have asked, and then at Heritage and through school, or my church community, I'd say more in my church community, but it's just, these things weren't discussed, like, at least out in the open. I had one, my uncle, we're close. He was a reader, still is a reader, reads a lot. And we would talk all the time. And, he held views that, he was, his wife would jab him, he was the first one to talk to me about, well, maybe Genesis 1 shouldn't be read literalistically. Like, maybe there are good reasons for that. So I would just have theological conversations with him, God and time, God and freedom. But in the church community at large, there wasn't a real sense that this was important. And so, although there was one figure, my uncle, who really spoke to me and made me feel known, it wasn't part of the culture. And I think we really need to foster that. That needs to be part of the culture, where we don't see these questions or people asking them as being weird or strange. Some of the smartest people who've ever lived have been Christians. Like, just take a casual perusal through history. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it might be tough for people who have come from our background, because might not be connected to a deep tradition. Like, a Catholic might be able to say, well, here is Aquinas, like, he is a doctor of the church. And this guy wrote something called the Summa Theologia, and it's got like 10 pages, 10 articles on just anger alone. Like, it's so detailed, and the guy was brilliant, a genius. So anyways, I was just dissatisfied with that culture. And I remember printing off like articles that I was reading from Craig about the historicity of the resurrection and putting them in people's mailboxes. So I was getting fired up about this. I was like, there are good historical reasons to believe in the resurrection. Isn't that cool? And my mom would look at me, it was more experiential for her. But she didn't really get it. But I was like, come on, this is so, I was nerding out, and it wasn't received by too many. At Heritage, obviously, in an academic context, you meet different people on different walks of life, coming with, from different backgrounds. But one professor that really stood out to me was Cyril Garrett. Maybe you'll hear this, so I'll just pump him up a bit. But he had a similar journey. He did theology at Cambridge, and I remember taking his intro to philosophy class, and so he was an encouragement to me, encouraging me to continue on with this, and so that was good. And there are a number of other professors like that who are encouraging me of like apologetics and learning, and so I wanted to turn I wanted to make that more into a culture. And so I remember, let's have book studies, or like, which, kids already, like, we got way too many books, man. Like, I can't even get through what Dr. Barker assigned to me, like my Old Testament survey. And you're saying, like, let's go read more books. Like, so I can't say I read through all the books I had to on top of what I was trying to add, but I was like, let's this is really important, guys. I remember trying to watch debates. I streamed a debate with William Lane Craig and Alex Rosenberg, and so I was trying to get my passion out there, and to create a culture. That's really what it is. Like the dissatisfaction with a lack of culture. Like my heart is seeing more of that.
Yeah, that culture, even in apologetics, has changed so much over the years. Where, I mean, you're talking about like this time where you're in high school and your undergrad. It's like a time where the new atheists were like the thing, right? And that whole movement has kind of like petered out, has shifted even. And so the questions that are being asked apologetically have also shifted. How has that landscape in your mind changed? And what are some new cultural questions that you see being posed?
Yeah. The landscape has changed. I mean, I guess I just have to give my own thoughts, not being a sociologist here, but I think the new atheists have had their day. I think that is petering out. I think there are even atheists who maybe are more mainstream, who are saying, I don't know if we want to be represented by these guys. A book like Dawkins' God Delusion could only have been well received by a population that is so utterly ignorant of philosophy and theology. It pains me to know of people that have lost their faith, have been persuaded by a book like that, because it's garbage. And obviously, let me make a distinction between people like Dawkins and atheism, because there are serious-minded atheists who know theology. I mean, Matt, you're a big Nietzsche fan, so I don't want to say all atheists are dumb, but by no means. I think there are atheists who are saying, maybe this isn't the best work. Maybe things need to be more nuanced. And there are atheists and agnostics who are for Christianity. This is a pretty fascinating movement. Christian atheists, people like the historian Tom Holland, who just came out with his book Dominion. This man, award-winning historian, wanted to find out what made the West unique, where our values came from, and thought, well, maybe he was fascinated by the Romans and their pomp and their power. But as he began to study these other civilizations, the more and more alien they became, and the more he realized, like, concerns for like the marginalized, the poor, like the dignity of all humanity, notions of freedom and so forth. These weren't coming from those sources, and he began to realize it's coming from Christianity, the Judeo-Christian tradition. And so he wrote this big book, looking at the legacy of Christianity, and even fascinatingly looking at how Christianity has influenced some of our current political discussions between the left and the right, and like the Me Too movement and all this stuff, and even some of the critical theory stuff. Other figures like Douglas Murray and others who are they are sympathetic to religion. They even writing books about how they want to see we need Christians. So there is this movement of people who see the influence of Christianity. They see that it's been a positive thing, and then how deeply the West has been shaped by it. So that's I think it's fascinating, and there's a lot of room for discussion and dialogue there.
Yeah. There's like this shift, right, where now the discussion doesn't seem to be like, here's 5 proofs for God. Let's talk about one and see if it actually does prove God or not. We don't have like these epic debates that are like so popular now today, right? Between sort of that old school Christian apologists and the new atheist movement.
Yeah.
What sort of like questions in your mind are really significant today that like these thinkers, these apologists should be like trying to answer in our culture?
Yeah. Well, I still think those questions are important. And of course, we should never allow culture to dictate our questions too much. So we need to be focused on things that are enduring. So I would just say that up front. These issues of God's existence, arguments for God, those are important, and I think a lot of people are still interested in that, and there are lots of discussions being had. I know there are apologetics movements like Capturing Christianity with Cameron Bertuzzi. I'd strongly suggest people in the audience check him out, and he is dialoguing with other atheist YouTubers. Alex O'Connor is one from Oxford, and quite a few others. So and he has some fascinating and brilliant Christian people on there. So there's that sort of thing still going on, and there are communities around that. But I think the big issue now is whether Christianity is good, whether God is good. So medievals have talked about the transcendentals of being, one, good, true, beautiful. And these are things that apply to all existent things. And they're really seen as divine names of God, and even the nouns in the New Testament could be seen as exemplifying the transcendentals. Light, truth. God is light. God is life. God is love. God is spirit. God is one. So we could talk about truth, and that's what you were just saying, Matt. Is Christianity true? Is it reasonable? What's the logic of it? Give me the facts. Is there evidences? Which is important, and the most important still. But then there's the question of whether it's good, and with that, whether we desire it. And a lot of people might not be open to the first unless they have a sense of the latter, and this is where beauty comes in too. Beauty entices, beauty consoles. Is it something that I really desire? And so I think a lot of people today think, well, Christianity means that women have to be in the kitchen, and they can't have equal rights, and we have to repeal what's going on in the society with homosexual rights and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people see Christianity as being, against some of these marginalized groups. That's important. What about atrocities of religion? This kind of came up with the new atheist too. Is God good? What about stuff in the Old Testament? God a moral monster and all this. So so that's a big one. Is Christianity, is it good? Is God good? Waking people up from their apathy as well. I think that's, some people are just apathetic. Like you said, why does it matter? There's this relativism, I can live life however I want, or it's all, happiness is subjective, which to the ancient philosophers would be seen as absolutely crazy. Even some of the hedonists, they thought there were subjective measures on this, like best way to pursue pleasure. So I think some of those are big issues, and those might keep people from engaging the truth issues and from wanting to hear some of the arguments for God's existence.
And I really resonate with that, and I don't know if it sometimes can be a generational thing or just certain eras in history, but it seemed like especially in the West, in response to the chaos of the 60s and 70s, that the 80s were marked by this hard U-turn in many church circles, kind of back to like, we needed the truth and we need to proclaim the truth and we need to give people the facts so they realize logically why not only the existence of God is legitimate, but obeying his word is good. And there's definitely a really, healthy place for that. But I'm 100% with you, in youth ministry, so many people are asking that question or some variant of it. Like, is God good? Is actually this the way to the good life? Is abundance what flows out of this?
Yeah.
And so I wonder, I guess to create almost like a hypothetical situation with you, Corey, or if you have a lived example you want to plug in, you're welcome to. But think of the student who's in their first year of university. They're 19 years old. They're on in a dorm room somewhere. The person to their right is just given over to, say, hedonism. They're just like partying multiple times every weekend. They're trying everything from, cocaine to sex to what have you. Like, they're just like living it up. And like, they think this is the good life, just reckless indulgence. To their left is a different person in the dorm. This person is like very disciplined, very integrous, cares about their grades, very success oriented, if you will. They're going to get good grades. They're going to do their masters. They're going to get a good job. And so for the one, just indulgence, pleasure, that's the good life. For the other, it's like work ethic, drive, kind of making a name for yourself. Like, this is the way to the good life. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I think a lot of our young people especially are caught between these poles, if that makes sense. Yeah. They're maybe in high school or college and they're saying, man, the good life looks like go wild, or the good life looks like buckle down, get great grades, go to a good school, make a lot of money. Would you just take some time to kind of drill down into those two things, starting with hedonism and then maybe moving to, you could say, moralism, if you will, or more an ambition, success-oriented perspective, and say, how does the gospel engage with our desire for pleasure and transcendent experiences, if you will? And then on the flip side, how does the gospel engage with our desire for identity and success and ambition, and show us that this is actually what's best? I'd love for you to explore that.
Yeah. Just one of the most important things you could talk about, I guess. No biggie. Well, it's interesting you mentioned moralism, because I think that's a kind of language that we need to be careful with and that I wouldn't use.
Okay.
Because if the alternative is a kind of hedonism or moralism, a lot of people might be led to hedonism, because I don't think moralism tracks with the true vision of morality. What do I mean by that?
Okay, yeah.
I think a lot of people think, and some people growing up in the church might have taken in too much legalism. Holiness has to do with behaviors, and it's a negative thing. Don't do this, don't do that. And we see a lot of that too with regards to what Christians stand for politically. It's like, we're against it, we're against it. No, what are we for? Because we are beings that are oriented towards an infinite horizon of truth and goodness. What do we desire? What's good? What's good for us? So Jesus said he came to bring life. People weren't like, oh man, this guy's so boring and unbearable. And he said, my burden is light, my yoke is easy. So people were flocking him because he had this life, eternal life. We need to think about how people were drawn to Jesus. And I think I'm sure like The Chosen does a great job, because when you see that Jesus, you don't think of like, the rigid taskmaster moralist. You just need to just embody these rules, and there's no rhyme or reason to these rules. That's where morality bottoms out, and it's just these duties, and that's it. And so I would want to help people to understand that that's not morality. That's not morality. To the ancients was seen as eudaimonia. That word means an objectively good state of the soul, and that was related to happiness. We think of happiness as a pleasurable state of satisfaction, feeling good. We've we've made it subjective, and we've associated it with, just feelings, and even base feelings, not even soaring affections, but just base feelings. And that word happiness means happenstance. It's just something that happens to you. But to them, it was more a way of life, a form of activity. So it connected your being and action, and involved things like virtue, these deep characterological states, fundamental attitudes. It's for that reason that some of the earliest Christians were seen as doctors of the soul. And I think as Christians, we need to recover some of this literature, some of these treatises on the virtues and the vices. Like when you think about the 8 deadly vices, you're getting at the stuff of drama and literature, envy, wrath, pride, obsessive lusting. And so you're not just, when you talk about those things, you're not just talking about this or that discrete action. You're talking about these fundamental states, these habits, which really characterize the depths of your being, and for Jesus, that was his focus, the heart. It's not what goes in you that defiles you, it's what comes out of you. The scribes, the righteous and the scribes and the Pharisees, it's all external behavior modification. Like inside you are dirty, you're whitewashed on the outside, you present yourself in this way. So I think getting people to see that it's really about formation, becoming fully alive and deeply human, is will help get people away from this kind of legalistic moralism. It's about friendship with God. It's about love of God. We have been placed here to be co-creators, collaborators with God. So the morality in that narrow sense is really the guide rails to help us to flourish and to become the best we can. But at one point we need to transcend them, so to speak. That's part of it. That's an important distinction I'd make, to get people to see the goodness of rightness and the rightness of goodness. And to do that, I would also, two people that I'd highly recommend, two Christian philosophers. Robert Spitzer is one. His book, Finding True Happiness, one of the best books I've ever read on this. I use, I use his stuff is like a template in my thinking. I use it all the time. And then another philosopher, Dietrich von Hildebrand, who I could nerd out about for a really long time. One of my favorite philosophers. But Robert Spitzer makes a distinction between 4 levels of happiness. And each level of happiness corresponds with a different level in the human person, a different range of powers, capacities. And those are, happiness as material possessions and pleasure, ego comparative advantage, good beyond self, common good, and then the summum bonum, or highest good. The first two kind of have to do with, I'm an organism, and I want to pursue pleasure and avoid pain, opportunities, and dangers. And then the second level has to do with like the fact that we can self-reflect. We are aware of ourselves. We are eyes. We are egos, right? And then the third has to do with the fact that we are empathetic, compassionate, and live beyond ourselves. And the fourth has to do with God, the greatest common good, if you will, that which we participate in. And he says that the first two lead to emptiness, lead to what he calls the hell of the comparison game. And for high school students listening, I think this would be really impactful, because if you're living for yourself, it's too small. right? You're constantly comparing yourself to others. And because of that, you're in competition with others. You see yourself over and against others. It's about, I need to be the best, the most popular. There are winners and losers. And if I'm a loser, and when any one of those states could be bad. If you're a winner, you're constantly trying to hold on to your position. If you're a loser, where you're at the bottom and, you could become bitter and resentful. But that all comes from just living for your own kingdom, trying to clench on your own kingdom. And those things lead to these negative existential states, ennui, boredom, dissatisfaction. If we are not just material beings, if we're capable of higher states, creativity, beauty, love, then we're going to be alienated from that highest part of ourselves. We're going to feel we're going to be living base lives, and so we'll feel bored over time. What are some of these other states? Alienation, guilt, loneliness, cosmic loneliness. People are having this, the COVID stuff is showing us how important relationships are. And if you're just living for yourself and for ego, if you're not connected in with what might be called the theodrama, if you're living for the ego drama yourself, you're going to be isolated. You're going to feel lonely, cut off from others and the cosmos. And so I think, hedonism is a dead end, and people who live that are miserable and they are restless. And they may not admit that because they don't know anything else, So to that college student who is engaged in all that, I would say, look deeper into yourself. All these things are enticing on the outside, but really take the time, if you can, to be in solitude and silence and, test your heart. Are there deeper desires there? And I think you'll find that that you are restless. And that's because, you have a higher nature. You're made for more. A lot in there, so hopefully some of that was helpful and on point. But
no, that's killer. And you've kind of already brought us into the next thing that I really wanted to ask you was about psychology. So you've kind of got this passion for psychology, and I know that for years now you've been thinking through like theology of mind and things like that. How can this sort of thing be particularly helpful as we think of our Christian lives? I mean, you've kind of already mentioned this. But maybe even in like self-care stuff, how could having some understanding of how God has created us psychologically help the Christian, especially with things like self-care?
Well, two examples of this. One, I've been listening to Gabor Mate, who's an award-winning physician, really well known. He's done a ton of work on addiction, trauma, and he began his series that I'm going through by pointing out that there's an epidemic of various diseases, and he was arguing that we can't just throw medication at this, we're holistic beings. We've severed the mind from the body, and we treat the body as a mechanism. And so if there's something broken in the machine, you just fix that cog, it'll work well. So we'll just throw some meds at it. Well, as he points out, we're holistic beings, and we're caught in a wider circle, an environment. And a lot of these diseases are caused by stress, which has an effect on us physiologically, but you can't just be reduced to the parts. And so he talks about things like a lack of attachment and connectivity, and how that leads to addiction and all this. So just there, I would say people are recognizing that this mechanistic understanding that we are just machines, this reductionistic view, is wrong. We need to treat ourselves as holistic beings. We are psychosomatic unities, soma, body, psyche, spirit. We are unities. And that's the same way with depression. A lot of people are depressed because they're aimless. They it's existential. They might think they're cosmic accidents. No wonder they're depressed, or they don't have a sense of purpose, or maybe they're just afraid of death because they think when you die you're annihilated. It's like, well, no wonder you're depressed. So, throwing meds at that might stabilize you, might neutralize you, but
Right.
So we need a unified approach. We need to begin to think more holistically and ask ourselves, what is the nature of the human person? What is the nature of the soul? So I see a number of non-Christian thinkers getting a hold of that, and that's really promising. And I think the church should utilize those resources because there's a lot out there, and they're wonderful, and they can be integrated.
Yeah, that's great. I've been thinking a bit about like Jesus taking on the weakness of our flesh. And so in Romans 6, where it talks about how we die with Christ, we put to death the body of sin, and that's like our mortal body, and it's raised with Jesus. And near the end of Romans 6, Paul will talk about how we no longer use that body for sin, but that body is now an instrument of righteousness. And it's been like moving for me to see how Jesus takes on what would be like sinless flesh, obviously without sin, doesn't take on a sin nature, but takes on like the brokenness of our fallen bodies. And you like see that in the garden, right? Where he says to Peter, like your flesh is weak, even though the spirit is willing. So when we speak of like medication, there's obviously, like you mentioned, these cases where medication can help stabilize so that, it's not impeding spirit necessarily. You know what I'm saying? How do you think like a holistic approach to dealing with the weakness of the flesh, what might be a willing spirit, like especially in issues pertaining to sinfulness, where it might not be necessarily like might not be a mental disorder per se, but let's go to, you mentioned like the vice of lust, right? How might having a holistic view of that mind-body relationship really help the Christians as they address that?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say we need to see the importance of spiritual disciplines in general. And I talked a bit about the virtues, and virtues really are, you can see it as a kind of second nature, a nature we add on to what we're born with. We develop it, we craft it, they become deep habits, like driving. Most of us started driving and we had to, pay attention to like everything going on, and now we are just at a point where, well, you can have a conversation, listen to a podcast, and you're fine. You want to be driving with someone who doesn't think about driving. Like be on an airplane, and the guy's like, oh, okay, this button's for this. I'm not getting on that airplane. So it needs to be formed. It needs to be, and then that frees us up to do other things. If I'm trying to do calligraphy, beautiful calligraphy, I want to get to a point where I'm not stuck in, okay, this is how you form the C and everything. So disciplines, spiritual disciplines, that involves the body. And we need to know our bodies and realize just to place the body in spiritual formation. It's so central. So when it comes to things like lust, realizing that what we focus on affects our brain chemistry, physiology. And so avoiding temptations, avoiding certain contexts, noticing your triggers, having a knowledge of your pattern, of those patterns. So that can be really important. I don't know what I can say to that issue specifically, bring up one example that I could maybe be more specific about, anxiety. If we are living our lives hectically, if we are flying through things, if we're always hurried, we're going to have a certain level of adrenaline. We're always going to be ready to fire, and that's not good for stress. And so we need to do something with our bodies. We need to change our habits. Maybe we need to try our best to slow down, go on a retreat. Or what I've been doing is practicing centering prayer. And there's a lot of good science on this. Book, Rupert Sheldrake's book, I think it's called, I'm not sure the title of it, but he has a book. Rupert Sheldrake, he was a biochemist at Cambridge. He's not a Christian, but he believes in God, remarkable guy. But he has a book on the science of spiritual and religious practices. And one of those is meditation. And Christians have a certain form of that, centering prayer, which is gaining revival. And he looks at how it calms the nervous system, how it allows us to get into a relaxation response where we're not in this fight or flight state, and so practicing something like that for 20 minutes a day even can really calm you, and in ways that just throwing out a prayer while you're driving down the highway might not. So that's something you can do with your body, and learning these habits are really important, and ingraining them. So I guess that's what I would say generally about that.
That's great.
My specific example for that.
I would just chip in. Yeah, I think it's episode 47 with AJ Sherrill. We talked to in the fall of 2021. He just wrote a book that came out in 2021 called Being with God, which is all about contemplative prayer. So just to point listeners in that direction. Corey, thank you, because all that is like super valuable. And so I wonder, maybe just, it doesn't have to be super in depth, but people might be listening to this, and as we kind of get to the last few questions together, they're thinking, I have never taken seriously psychology. I didn't really think about it in high school, or maybe I've got a year left in high school and I could take this, or maybe I'm in university now and I could take psychology as a minor, or just intro to psych class. Mm-hmm. And I realize it actually is pretty significant. It applies to a lot of life, that it not only can form my understanding of faith in Jesus, but just things like personal wellness or relating to others, or my overall academic journey. And so given your studies in that field, would you just have any go-to words of knowledge or advice to young people, or even older people who are saying, I want to delve into this more? What would be some of the go-to words of wisdom you'd share with them?
Yeah. Well, for me, I try to integrate these things that I've studied: philosophy, theology, and psychology. I think they can be distinguished, but and this is one of the reasons why I want to study positive psychology, is because it's about what makes up the good life, human flourishing. What, instead of just focusing on pathologies and like a lot of psychoanalysis has, which is invaluable, and just the things that just pathological states, neuroses, things like that. What makes up the good life, flourishing human being? It's a discipline that is, even by its pioneers, people like Martin Seligman and others, there's a lot of openness to religion, to wisdom tradition, to religious texts, to peak experiences, mystical experiences, religious experiences. So I tried to integrate all these things and go where it's interesting and helpful. So that'd be the first thing. Would be, if you can read people that are interdisciplinary, that's always really helpful. So one of those words of caution might be to find someone who has a holistic view of the human person, someone who has a rich sense of humanism. There's a lot of good psychologists in psychology that doesn't have a reductionistic view of the human person, that we're nothing but our brains, we're nothing but our base drives. Someone like Freud, we're not, everything's sexual, and the way we understand sex is just on the most base level. We don't connect it with states like eros or love, spousal love. So find thinkers that are holistic, and there are quite a few. One that stands out to me is Abraham Maslow. I've been reading a book on his thought called Transcend. It's not by him. I'd have to look up this fellow, but Transcend, a new psychology of human nature, and he's looking at Maslow's hierarchy of human needs.
Right.
What do all human beings need? This is something that's cross-cultural, and our needs for security, for growth, and then ultimately for transcendence. And as he points out, it doesn't cap out in one's own growth or perfection or becoming the best version of yourself. I think that's a big danger today in pop psychology, is this kind of, as Matt, you're talking about, self-care and the therapeutic, and there's nothing wrong with that. We, in order to love others, we need to be healthy and functioning. If we're just totally stressed out and anxious ridden, like, we won't be able to love our family. We're to love others as we love ourselves. But as he points out, this fellow points out in this book, it's all about growing so that we can live for things beyond ourselves. Things like justice and beauty aren't in the head. Friendship is with others. So we need to grow, become the best version of ourselves, so to speak, so that we can make a maximal contribution in the world to things that, getting back to Spitzer's framework, that go beyond material possessions and pleasures. And there's nothing wrong with that. As Christians, we can celebrate creation. We can celebrate all those good things beyond just self-esteem and, just being a top CEO and living for things beyond yourself, the common good, and ultimately for the kingdom of God, in which all these things participate. So, I'm staying on track there.
Now you're all over it. Great. So if this conversation has been about anything, I think it's interesting. We sort of started out talking about apologetics and how, we need to be grounded in the truth. We've sort of moved into this area of what is good and how do we set our minds on things above. But you had mentioned earlier just about beauty. And I know that beauty's been something that has been on your mind and on your heart for a long time, and you've been working through it. And you've shared resources with me about that. As we think of those who might be listening, how might not just thinking about the truth of God and the goodness of God, but to really be struck by his beauty, how does that change us? How does that motivate us to seek him above everything else?
Well, I forget which passage or where it is in the Psalms, but Psalmist writes that he yearns to see the beauty of the Lord. The beauty of the Lord. So I think the desire for beauty is rooted in human nature. And again, there's been a big debate in the tradition about whether beauty is a transcendental, but many thinkers, many Christians have identified beauty as a divine name. God is beautiful. God is the beautiful one. But what I think beauty does, what it can do, is bring a sense of home and consolation. Of course, beauty is multifaceted, but for me, it whenever I encountered it it gives me a sense that life is worth living. It's consoling, even just, it can be simple beauty, but just seeing, thinking of the beauty of a small town, can give one a sense of, just consolation, home. The things aren't alien. So I one of the things that got me thinking more deeply about beauty was Sir Roger Scruton's English philosopher. He recently passed away, but his
Let's go. Sorry. I'm not a philosopher, but I love Roger
Luke's into
Scruton.
it.
All right, let's go.
Dude, he's beautiful. His
here getting someone excited.
it's on the bookcase behind me. It's like his short work on beauty.
Oh yeah, that
helped me a ton.
Yeah. So his documentary, Why Beauty Matters, and
Yes,
I resonate with that deeply. But he just talks about, well, man doesn't live on bread alone. What are these things that we are living for that make life meaningful? Or is it all just efficiency? Is everything instrumental? Are we just moving towards nothingness as fast as we can, or just base pleasures? Like what? In our current context, we need to fight against that. We need to develop our chests and our souls. Why are we just working hastily? What's the end? And beauty is one of those things that remind us that life is meaningful. And so, like, scrutiny just says, why do people not live in this apartment? Because it's so dang ugly, and then it gets torn down, and when you see an ugly building, it's alien, and it doesn't make you happy. It just, you might become depressed driving through certain neighborhoods, like the color scheme and everything, like the shoddiness of everything. You don't have an esteem. You don't want to be there. You're averse to it. And so beauty draws you in. Which is why when you have a beautiful building, people find use for it. The function, it gets slotted into the form. And so I think beauty is, just a basic value. It is a fundamental need, really. And it reminds us that there are these non-utilitarian ends, so to speak, things that we can rest in, that we can enjoy for their own sake. So I'm not, I don't want to say that I'm an immensely cultured man, or anything like that. So I'm not like our critic, but I've tried to think more deeply about beauty, and I think people who can bring about beauty should, whether they're in architecture or the arts or whatever, that is, or even just home decorum, just simple beauty of decorating a house. What it's like to go into someone's house, living room, there's a certain theme to it and style, versus just someone like a frat guy house, it's just like disgusting mess. You don't want to be in that environment, like
Oh man, when I was in college, our living room with the 7 other guys I lived with had, like, I can't remember who, one of the characters from Seinfeld on a poster, a Lionel Messi poster, and then like a nature poster, like an iceberg. And it was like so bizarrely disconnected. But hey, two things real quick on what you just said. That passage, Psalm 27:4. One thing I ask of the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. But also with what you said about Scruton, just to chip this in, because we're going to land the plane in a moment, would hugely encourage listeners to check out Roger Scruton. Scruton is Scruton. In that documentary and other work he's written, one of the things Scruton loves to point out and feels it's really crucial to point out is that one of the potentially dangerous evolutions of modern art is that it desires to provoke shock in people, for them to see it and be like, dude. And he points to things like, I believe it was in the 1920s, one of the most famous pieces of early modern art was that an artist basically took a urinal
and then like signed his name on it.
Yeah.
And people were like, what? You can't put that in an art exhibit. And he's like, it is. And it's modern art and it's evoking emotion. And so suddenly people started to say, oh, if I put a canvas just with like a slash mark through it, that's art. Or if I have like literally a can of poop, like that's modern art. People looking at it and being repulsed or scared or shocked in some way. And what Scruton pointed out, which I thought was so good, is he said, this isn't beautiful. And because it's not beautiful, it doesn't evoke in us a desire to nurture, celebrate, and preserve that beauty. It actually promotes in us a consumeristic mentality where we see that, we're shocked, we feel these emotions for 5 seconds, and then we move on. And then when someone's like, oh, have you ever seen the urinal? We're like, yep, saw it, done. But when someone's like, have you been to the Eiffel Tower? And it's like, yeah, I would go back in a heartbeat. Why? Because this is something artistic that is beautiful. It draws us in, as you said, it's compelling. And so I just touch on that because I know for myself, one of the things I realized that is so formative in the way that beauty shapes my value of people is recognizing that I'm meant to not only become somebody who lives in a way that draws people into something good that's bigger than myself, but that celebrates those things in other people. So the ways that they're living that cultivate something beautiful, either in the context of family or work or academic setting, if you will. And the danger is if I see them as quote unquote beautiful just because of their looks or their skill or their status or lack thereof, I'll use people. I'll consume them. I'll just use like what can this person give me? And then like I move on. But if I see them as like an integral part of bringing something good and beautiful in the world, especially as like followers of Jesus, that radically deepens my value of their personhood. And and I think the same is true of God's in design for us in the way that we see and savor beauty in the world. So sorry, I'm not a philosopher. I know so few philosophers, but Scruton's like my guy. I'm like this guy. Like
if anyone's going to be your guy, that's a good guy. Do you mind if I read one passage before you wrap this up? One of the first things that got me thinking more deeply about beauty, and something that just a passage that captures my own experience and probably the experience of many. It's from one of my favorite philosophers. If you want another guy, here's another guy, David Bentley Hart, Eastern Orthodox philosopher and theologian. His book, The Experience of God, Being, Consciousness, and Bliss. Also a great book to give to the new atheist friends of yours, any of those people, or to people who have been reading them, because it is a great response to how theologians and philosophers have thought about God, and how in many of our discussions we just don't really know what we're talking about. We've lost the grammar. We don't really know what God means. So this would be just a top recommendation. But in the chapter on bliss, he writes this: when we encounter the beautiful, after all, what is it that compels us? What draws us in and awakens us to a splendor beyond our particular interest and desires and predilections? In a canvas by Titian, a Bach violin parita, or simply a particularly well-tended garden. It is not simply this or that aspect of its composition, not simply its neurological effect, not simply its clarity or vividness or suggestive associations. It is not even just the virtuosity of its execution or the mastery exhibited in its composition. Rather, it is all of these things experienced as sheer fortuity. I may be speaking of something that escapes exact definition, but it seems clear to me that the special delight experienced in the encounter of beauty is an immediate sense of the utterly unnecessary there-ness, so to speak, of a thing, the simple gratuity with which it shows itself, or better, gives itself. Apart from this, even the most perfectly executed work of art would be only a display of artisanal proficiency or of pure technique, but not that strange rapture that marks the most intense of aesthetic experiences. What transforms the merely accomplished into the revelatory is this invisible nimbus of utter gratuity. Rather than commanding our attention with the force of necessity, or oppressing us with the triteness of something inevitable, or recommending itself to us by its utility or its purposiveness, the beautiful presents us presents itself to us as an entirely unwarranted, unnecessary, and yet marvelously fitting gift. Beauty, as opposed to mere strikingness or brilliancy, is an event or even eventuality as such. It is the movement of a gracious disclosure of something otherwise hidden, which need not reveal itself or give itself. In the experience of the beautiful and of its pure fortuity, we are granted our most acute, lucid, and most splendid encounter with the difference of transcendent being and the realm of finite created things. The beautiful affords us our most perfect experience of that existential wonder that is the beginning of all speculative wisdom. The state of amazement lies always below the surface of ordinary consciousness. It stirs us from our habitual forgetfulness of the wonder of being and grants us a particularly privileged awakening from our fallenness into ordinary awareness, reminding us that the fullness of being, which far exceeds any given distance of its disclosure, graciously condescends itself to show itself again and again in the finitude of a transient event. We are given a glimpse with a feeling of wonder that restores us momentarily to something like the innocence of childhood, of that inexhaustible source that pours itself in the gracious needlessness of being.
It's a good note to end on. Just to, you were talking about the Sunam Bonum before, and just how our lives are directed towards something, and God's beauty, is this magnificent thing, this gratuitous gift that comes and reveals itself to us. And for many of us, the way that we first got there was through seeing lesser beauties that directed us and pointed us towards that ultimate, most glorious beauty. These small gifts, these small things that seemed, beyond what we expected to experience in coming to them, really pointed us towards something greater and more transcendent.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Whether it's a song or a nicely, organized garden, all of these things direct us.
Or your wife, love.
Oh yeah.
Spousal love has always led great many people to something transcendent. That love opens up to something beyond, something comes through that. So I'm sure that, that's played.
Dude, for real, like there have been times where I've been like struck by marriage and how it is so participatory, in the sense that like your marriage is only good in as much as it participates in God's gift of marriage. And that to me is like the best thing about marriage, the thing that keeps that covenant relationship together, even through the most difficult times, isn't because of my great relationship with my wife, but the great gift of marriage that God has given, and how that points higher. So thanks for that. That's great.
And the fruit of that love is beautiful things like Matt's son Ezra.
Tiny baby.
Oh yeah. All that to say, Corey, we really appreciate you and the adventure of this conversation, going hither and yon, over the river and through the woods, if you will. But if people want to further this conversation, are there ways that they could touch base with you, or would you even just say, hey, this is a way to get connected with some of the resources that I really love and think are really valuable that touch on some of the topics of philosophy, psychology, and theology that we've talked about today?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, if people want to reach out, they can hit me up on Facebook. That's the easiest way. So if anyone wants to talk further, I'd love to. I mean, this is kind of my life. But resources, I mean, there are a couple. I would say my first recommendations would be the Hildebrand Project. I had mentioned him before, one of my favorite philosophers. And for people who are interested in beauty, there's a whole conference recorded on this theme I got to go to. And so that's all on YouTube. There are a lot of resources. They do book readings. And so I'd highly recommend that. It'll just expand your life and help you become a better person well worth your time. And for the apologetic stuff, I'd of course recommend Reasonable Faith, William Lane Craig. one of the biggest influences on my life. We talk about arguments for God's existence, Christian evidences. He's top notch, and so many great resources there. And just for grassroots apologetic stuff, Capturing Christianity, Cameron Bertuzzi, he's great. Lots of people in that community, and he just has some of the brightest Christian people on all sorts of stuff. And so, look, you can get a free education nowadays, with this stuff, here we are podcasting. So I'd recommend those things. Those would be 3 recommendations.
Right on.
Okay, that's sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Corey, for taking the time to chat with us about this, that, and the other. And it's been sweet to be able to listen to you just unload things that I know have been on your heart and mind for years. So we really appreciate it. And we're sure that those that are listening have really gleaned much from it. So thank you so much. And thank you to those who are joining us. We appreciate it.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.